Have you ever thought that after death, everything just ends? No heaven, no hell, nothing. I used to believe that too, but then I died, and what I experienced on the other side changed me forever. Welcome to Eternal Bible Stories. Today, I will tell you my own story, a story of someone who was once an atheist, who did not believe in the existence of God. But after death, I saw hell, the most terrifying place a human could ever imagine, and then I was given the chance to see heaven, a place filled with light and love. What I am about to share may change the way you see life and death. If you are interested in real near-death experiences, hit the like button and subscribe right now. If you also have your own story, send it to eternalbiblestories@gmail.com. And now, listen closely, because what I am about to tell you may change the way you see life forever. My name is Brian Melvin, and many years ago I was an atheist. Not just someone who didn't believe in God, but someone who openly mocked those who had faith. I saw religion as nothing more than a crutch for the weak, a fairy tale for those afraid to face the reality of life and death. I took pride in debating believers, tearing apart their arguments with logic and reason, convinced that science had all the answers. But everything changed the day I unknowingly drank contaminated water. Not long after, I contracted cholera, and my body began shutting down at an alarming rate. The dehydration was severe, leaving me weak, delirious, and barely able to function. I felt my strength fading with every passing minute, and deep down I knew I was dying. It was a terrifying realization, but I held on to the belief that when my heart stopped, when my brain activity ceased, that would be the end. No soul, no afterlife, no judgment, just eternal nothingness. And so, as I took what I thought was my final breath, I expected complete darkness, an endless void of unconsciousness. But I was wrong. In that very moment, I was still conscious. Instead of fading into oblivion, I felt myself separating from my body, rising effortlessly into the air. I could see everything with perfect clarity, the room, the people around me, and most disturbingly, my own lifeless body lying motionless below. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I had been unshackled from a heavy burden I never even realized I was carrying. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of freedom. I continued to rise, moving effortlessly through the ceiling, passing beyond the physical world into an expanse of darkness stretching infinitely in all directions. Yet this darkness was not empty. It was alive, shifting, almost watching me. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A radiant light unlike anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't just bright, it was alive, pulsing with an energy so intense, so powerful, that I couldn't look away. And then I heard it, a melody so beautiful, so profound, that human words fail to describe it. It wasn't just music, it was a message, a revelation, as if the very essence of the universe was being woven into sound. I could feel it speaking to my soul, revealing truths far beyond my comprehension. In that moment, I knew I was in the presence of something far greater than myself. This was no illusion, no hallucination caused by a dying brain. This was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced in my physical life. For the first time, I understood that God wasn't just an abstract concept or a creation of human imagination. He was real, He was infinite, and He was right there before me. But just as I began to feel an overwhelming sense of love and belonging, something changed. The warmth of the light turned into something else, something I had not expected. Suddenly, I felt completely exposed, as if every hidden thought, every action, and every motive of my heart was being laid bare. This light was not just love, it was judgment. And as I stood in its presence, every mistake, every selfish decision, every time I had rejected the truth, flashed before my eyes in perfect detail. There was no way to deny it, no way to justify or explain myself. I had spent my life mocking and rejecting the very being now standing before me, and in that moment I realized I was in serious trouble. Suddenly I felt myself descending and found myself standing before a being, one whom I knew instantly, without a doubt, was Jesus Christ. He didn't need to introduce himself. There was no question in my mind. I simply knew. The moment I met his gaze, something inside me shattered. It was as if his eyes saw straight through me, piercing into the deepest parts of my soul. Under his gaze, I saw myself for who I truly was. Not the person I had convinced myself I was, but the reality of who I had been. Arrogant, selfish, sinful. Then Jesus showed me something that left me speechless. I saw every moment he had tried to save me. Times when he had reached out, when I had been spared from accidents that should have taken my life, when people of faith had come to me, urging me to repent. I had ignored them all. Every chance, every sign, every warning, dismissed. Then he looked at me and spoke. "You cannot enter heaven, for if you were allowed in, you would defile it. But now you will see a land that no one wishes to remember, yet none can forget. When you feel overwhelmed, call upon my name and my title. Whether you return to earth or not, that has yet to be decided." The moment he finished speaking, a force stronger than anything I had ever felt grabbed hold of me and threw me backward toward a massive doorway. The door rolled up like a scroll, and before I could react, I was pulled into utter, suffocating darkness. I was falling, not floating, not drifting, falling violently, spiraling downward into something beyond comprehension. The air around me was thick, hot, and heavy, like I had been swallowed by a furnace. A deafening roar filled my ears, a mixture of screams, wails, and disturbing guttural voices speaking in languages I had never heard before. It wasn't just chaotic noise, it was torment, a symphony of suffering that never ended. The deeper I fell, the more intense it became. It was as if every sound carried the weight of eternal agony, a pain that could never be silenced. And then the stench hit me. It was overwhelming, a nauseating combination of rotting flesh, sulfur, and decay, so intense that I felt like I was suffocating. Every breath I took was filled with it, making my stomach churn, my throat burn. It was as if the very air in this place had been poisoned with death itself. I gasped, trying to clear my lungs, but there was no relief. Just the heavy, sickening realization that this was what eternity smelled like here. I kept falling, faster and faster, unable to stop myself, unable to grasp onto anything. My surroundings were shifting, changing, like an endless vortex of dark clouds and flickering flames, but none of it made sense. There was no up or down, no sense of direction. It was as if I was being dragged into a place that existed outside of time and space. And then I hit the ground. The impact was brutal, knocking the air from my lungs, but the pain didn't stop there. The ground beneath me wasn't solid, it was jagged, burning, alive. It seared into my flesh and I scrambled to get up, but the very earth seemed to cling to me, almost like it wanted to consume me whole. My hands sank slightly into the surface, and a horrifying realization hit me. This ground was made of something living, something suffering. It was like I had landed on a sea of writhing, tortured souls, their forms compressed into an unrecognizable mass beneath my feet. And they were screaming. I forced myself to my feet, my entire body trembling as I took in my surroundings. Before me stretched a vast, desolate landscape, dry, cracked, and unbearably hot, as if the ground had been scorched by fire for eternity. The sky above was a sickly, dark red, pulsing as though it were alive, filled with swirling black smoke that moved like a living thing. Jagged mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks stretching into an endless void, and in the farthest reaches of my vision, I saw rivers of fire, twisting and churning like liquid lava, stretching as far as the eye could see. But the most unsettling part? The silence between the screams. It wasn't just emptiness. It was a feeling of hopelessness so deep that it pressed against me like a physical force. And then I saw it. A structure stood in the distance, a decaying house, barely holding itself together, its walls sagging, its roof caving in. It looked out of place, like a relic from the physical world trapped in a nightmare. Something about it felt familiar, but I couldn't place why. My feet moved toward it before my mind could process what I was doing, and then they appeared. Figures began emerging from the house, people I once knew. Their faces were warm, familiar, their voices soft and welcoming. They smiled as they approached me, their expressions eerily reassuring, as if they were greeting an old friend. For a split second, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that I had somehow found a place of refuge in this hellish wasteland. But everything about this place felt wrong. The ground beneath me pulsed, the sky above me whispered, and the air itself thickened around me, suffocating me with a weight I couldn't see but could feel pressing down on my soul. Then I looked into their eyes, and their eyes changed. The moment I locked eyes with them, their pupils elongated, turning yellow and slit-like, just like a reptile's. And in that instant their entire forms shifted, their faces contorted, their smiles twisted into something unnatural, and in a flash, the illusion shattered. The people I thought I knew were no longer human. Their skin became grey and leathery, their limbs elongated and sharp, their teeth jagged and dripping with saliva. They let out a guttural growl, their bodies convulsing and twitching as if they had been waiting for this moment. And then they lunged at me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in terror. Their claws swiped at me, their teeth snapped inches from my face. They moved with unnatural speed, circling me like predators playing with their prey. Their screams were deafening, filled with a rage and hunger that made my very soul tremble. The air itself seemed to tighten around me, suffocating, pressing down like an invisible force that wanted to crush me into nothingness. The overwhelming realization hit me. I was in hell. And then I remembered. The words Jesus had spoken to me before I was cast into this place. When you feel overwhelmed, call upon my name and my title. In that moment, I had no other choice. I opened my mouth and screamed with everything I had. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. The reaction was instantaneous. The creatures froze in place, their bodies jerking as if struck by an unseen force. Their snarls turned into screeches of pain, their forms twisting and writhing in agony. They clawed at their own faces, their yellow eyes filled with something I never thought I'd see in them, fear. They could torment me, they could terrorize me, but they could not touch me. Because the name of Jesus had power, even in this place, even in the depths of hell. The creatures began to back away, their faces contorted in rage and frustration. They wanted to tear me apart, but they couldn't. They wanted to drag me further into the depths of this nightmare, but something was holding them back, something greater than them. The very ground beneath me trembled. The air pulsed, and I realized this place was reacting to the name of Jesus. It wasn't just the creatures that feared him. This entire realm did. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would be trapped here forever. But in that moment, one thing became abundantly clear. Jesus was the only way out. A creature led me through this forsaken place. It wasn't human. Nothing in this realm was. It stood at about 1.4 meters tall, with rough reptilian skin that looked like it had been scorched and hardened over centuries. Its breath was so foul, so rancid, that waves of heat rippled out from its mouth, distorting the air like a mirage on scorching pavement. I could barely stand the smell, but I had no choice but to follow. In my mind, I named it lizard breath. Without speaking, the creature reached out with its gnarled, clawed fingers and tore open the very fabric of the air. It was as if reality itself was just a veil, and it was peeling it back to reveal something much worse beyond. It motioned for me to step through. I hesitated, but then I realized I had no control here. I was not in charge. I was nothing in this place. So I stepped forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, I found myself on a dusty, barren road, the air thick with smoke and ash. Surrounding me were countless towering structures, stacked one on top of another like prison cells, stretching endlessly in every direction. These were not buildings, they were confinements. Holding cells of suffering, cages of torment. The sky above swirled with dark, churning vortexes, massive tornado-like spirals that seemed to reach down, sucking people into the air before violently dropping them into these cells. Others were dragged, kicking and screaming, by grotesque demonic entities, pulled toward their fate, thrown into their own personal prisons of suffering. I peered into one of the cells. Inside, I saw a man tormented without end. He had been a man who, in life, took pleasure in mocking and humiliating others, belittling them, making them feel worthless, feeding off their pain for his own amusement. Now, he was the one being mocked. Surrounding him were twisted, nightmarish creatures, their mouths stretching unnaturally wide as they hurled insults and cruel laughter, every word cut deep, each taunt digging into his very being, shredding away any sense of self-worth he had left. But no matter how much he screamed, no matter how much he begged for it to stop, it never did. I moved to another cell. Inside, I saw a former pastor, a man who once stood at the pulpit, preaching righteousness, yet behind closed doors he abused his position, using his authority to manipulate and seduce women. Now he was trapped, his body engulfed in a never-ending fire of desire, a burning that he could never satisfy. His cravings consumed him, but there was no relief. He clawed at himself, writhed in agony, yet the more he suffered, the more the fire grew. The very thing he had fed in life had become his torment in death, an eternal hunger that could never be fulfilled. And then I saw something different, a section unlike the others. It radiated a deeper, darker presence. I could feel the sheer weight of evil pressing against me as I walked toward it. It was a place for the worst of the worst. I stepped toward one particular chamber, and my breath caught in my throat. It looked like a crematorium, a gas chamber straight out of Auschwitz. The walls were charred black, the air thick with a stench of burning flesh, the faint sound of gasping, panicked breaths filling the space. And inside was Adolf Hitler. His punishment was far beyond anything I had seen. I watched as he relived over and over again every moment of horror his victims had suffered, not as a spectator, but as them. He felt their pain, their terror, their final moments. He felt the brutal separation from their families, the dehumanizing cruelty, the suffocating panic as the gas filled their lungs. But here's what shocked me most. It didn't change him. He wasn't remorseful, he wasn't repentant. If anything, he had become even more twisted. His hatred had not diminished, it had intensified. His rage and malice had not been stripped away, it had grown stronger. His very essence was being consumed by the same evil he had unleashed upon the world. And in that moment, I understood something I had never grasped before. Hell wasn't just about punishment. It was the full realization of who you had chosen to become. These souls weren't just suffering, they were becoming the very worst versions of themselves, eternally spiraling deeper and deeper into the consequences of their own corruption. There was no redemption here. There was no second chance. Only the inescapable, undeniable reality that they had made their choice, and now that choice would consume them forever. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the sheer horror of everything I had seen. I felt something inside me begin to break. The torment, the suffering, the endless agony. I knew I couldn't take it any longer. I could feel the weight of eternity pressing down on me, the terrifying realization that this was not a dream, not an illusion, this was real. And if I didn't do something, I would never escape. And then I remembered. Jesus had told me what to do. I took a deep breath, or at least I tried to, and with everything I had left, I screamed his name. Jesus! 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 Instantly, everything shifted. I felt a powerful force grab me, pulling me upward, yanking me away from the nightmare that had swallowed me whole. The creatures, the cells, the endless suffering. It all began to fade into the distance as I was lifted out of the pit. The howls of rage and torment grew fainter, as if something was pulling me back to where I was meant to be. And then I woke up. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I had been drowning. I was no longer in hell, I was back in my body. My eyes flew open, my chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. My whole body trembled as I struggled to process what had just happened. The room around me was spinning, the sounds of the world returning like a distant echo. I had returned. Later, I would learn that my neighbor had found me unconscious and rushed me to the hospital. The doctors diagnosed me with cholera, a disease that had nearly shut my body down completely. They weren't sure if I would survive, but somehow, against all odds, I did. But even though my body had been healed, my mind was not. The memories of hell wouldn't leave me alone. The images haunted me. The sounds followed me into my sleep. The stench of burning flesh, the twisted laughter, the endless torment. It all played in my mind, over and over again, like a nightmarish film I couldn't turn off. I had survived, but I wasn't free. I was terrified. I was afraid to sleep, afraid to close my eyes, afraid that if I did, I might end up back there again. I had seen too much, and no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it had been just a dream, just a hallucination, just a near-death experience, I knew the truth. I had been to hell, and I never wanted to go back. One evening, after yet another sleepless night, I reached my breaking point. I sat alone in my apartment, slumped into my old beanbag chair, staring blankly at the wall. I had nowhere left to run. I had tried to ignore it, tried to push it away, but the fear never left me. I couldn't do this on my own. So, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, I spoke the only words that I had left in me. Jesus, I never want to go back there. Please save me. I belong to you. The moment the words left my mouth, something incredible happened. A cold wind swept through the room. It wasn't just a slight breeze, it was a powerful, refreshing presence that wrapped around me like a blanket. My entire body shivered, but not from fear, from relief. I looked over at the thermostat. The outside temperature was 94 DF-DEC, and yet my apartment felt cool, peaceful, completely untouched by the summer heat. And in that moment, I knew. I had been reborn. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid anymore. The memories were still there, but they didn't own me. The fear no longer controlled me. Something had changed inside me, something eternal. I had been given a second chance, and this time, I wouldn't waste it. Even though I had been saved, the memories of hell never left me. No matter how hard I tried to move on, the horror of what I had seen haunted my mind. I couldn't escape the images, the sounds, the overwhelming terror of that place. I lived in fear, afraid that if I slipped up, if I failed in any way, I would end up back there again. I tried everything to hold on to my salvation. I did good deeds, I prayed constantly, I lived as righteously as I could, hoping that it would be enough to keep me from ever going back. But no matter what I did, I always felt uneasy, always worried that one mistake, one failure would send me back into the darkness. I didn't understand grace. I didn't understand what Jesus had truly done for me. Then one day, Jesus opened my eyes to see heaven. I don't know if I was taken up in my physical body or if it was just my soul, but what I experienced healed something deep inside me. The fear, the doubt, the anxiety that had followed me since my return from hell, all of it melted away in an instant. I found myself standing in a vast open field, stretching endlessly in every direction. But this wasn't just any field, it was alive. The grass shimmered with light, swaying gently, as if responding to a song I couldn't hear but could somehow feel. The sky above was the most vibrant shade of blue I had ever seen, and the air was filled with a peace so pure that I could feel it settle deep in my soul. There was something different about the air here. It wasn't just oxygen, it was life itself. I breathed in deeply, and for the first time I felt completely whole, completely new, completely at peace. It was as if every wound, every burden, every weight I had ever carried simply didn't exist anymore. And then I saw the people. Everywhere I looked, people were reuniting with their loved ones, embracing, laughing, crying tears of joy. It was unlike anything I had ever seen on earth. There was no sorrow, no sadness, only pure love and restoration. It was as if every broken relationship, every separation, every painful goodbye had been erased, replaced by the joy of being together again, forever. I saw a mother who had once been broken with grief because she had aborted her child. She had carried guilt and pain for years, believing that she had lost her baby forever. She had lived her whole life thinking God would never forgive her, that she would have to bear the weight of that decision for all eternity. And then she saw him. A young boy, radiant with joy, came running toward her, his little arms stretched wide. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing, but before she could even speak, the child wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "Hi, Mummy, we have all of eternity together now, don't cry anymore." The moment he spoke, her tears dried instantly. In their place, a joy unlike anything I had ever seen flooded her face. Every ounce of shame, every burden of regret, gone, replaced by pure, overwhelming peace. I saw a father reunited with a son he had lost too soon. I saw brothers and sisters embracing after years of separation. I saw grandparents meeting grandchildren they had never known on earth. And with every reunion, the same thing happened. The pain of the past disappeared, replaced by perfect love and healing. Here, in this place, there was no more pain, no more sorrow, no more regret. There was only redemption, only love, only peace. In heaven, no one was judged by their past. No one carried the weight of their mistakes. Every single person here had been fully accepted, fully loved, fully restored, not because of what they had done, but because of what Jesus had done for them. And at that moment, I understood something that changed me forever. I had spent so much time trying to earn my place in heaven, afraid that if I didn't do enough, I would lose my salvation. But now I saw the truth. Salvation was never about what I could do. It was about what Jesus had already done. I saw him then, Jesus. He stood in the distance, his presence radiating unimaginable love. And when our eyes met, I finally understood. He had paid the price. He had carried my sins. He had suffered in my place. And heaven wasn't a reward for the righteous. It was a gift for the redeemed. I didn't need to fight for it. I didn't need to strive for it. It had already been given to me, freely, through the love and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. When I returned to earth, I was a different person. The fear that had once controlled me was gone. I no longer lived in anxiety, trying to be good enough for God. I finally understood that my place in heaven was not something I had to fight for. It was something Jesus had already secured for me. I didn't have to strive anymore. I didn't have to be afraid anymore. Because salvation wasn't something I could earn. It was a free gift, given in love, paid for by Jesus Christ himself. I had been given a second chance, and now I had a purpose: to share this truth with everyone who would listen.